She had learned to live with wheels under her instead of legs, and after 10 years of rolling from council chambers to awkward dinners, she'd grown both sarcastic and tired of the pitying stares. Her people were dignified, proper, polite to the point of choking, but she knew every time someone bowed to her chair, what they really wanted was to run back and whisper about the once mighty warrior reduced to metal frames and humming hover coils. She leaned into humor as armor, cutting her courtiers with sharper wit than any blade she used to wield, but it didn't erase the aching truth: she hadn't stood, danced, or even stumbled in a decade. Then the humans arrived. Loud, brash, irreverent, and, worst of all, always making jokes that sounded like propositions. Their translator devices struggled with nuance, so half the time when one of them said tighten a bolt, it came across as screw it harder. When they talked about hardware compatibility, nobles blushed and fanned themselves as if the words dripped with scandal. She was used to the aliens of the galaxy treating her condition with solemnity, but humans? They laughed, teased, flirted, even called her wheels like it was a nickname at a bar. It was insulting, infuriating, and oddly refreshing. The engineer stood out from the others. He had grease on his hands, confidence in his smirk, and the kind of easy arrogance that only a human could wear like perfume. When he looked at her chair, he didn't look away like the rest. He stared, inspected, measured with his eyes as if already sketching schematics in his head. Then he dropped the line that started everything. He said, with a wink and zero hesitation, "I could give you legs." The entire chamber froze. Her people gasped, guards stiffened, and she nearly barked out a laugh. Give her legs? Was this some human courtship ritual? She raised an eyebrow and fired back that she hadn't been propositioned that bluntly since before her accident. The guards snickered. The translator turned his words into "I can screw new legs onto you," which didn't help. Suddenly, the entire exchange sounded less like engineering and more like foreplay in a workshop. She expected him to stammer, to apologize, but instead he leaned in and doubled down. No joke. Real legs. Metal, wires, joints. Walking, dancing, running, anything you want. I'll bolt them right on. She thought he was either insane or hitting on her with the most persistent pickup strategy she'd ever endured. But his eyes didn't waver, and his hands kept sketching in the air, tracing shapes of hips and knees as if they were blueprints. The guards began making bets on whether installation meant a wedding night. Courtiers whispered about whether oiling joints was a euphemism. She, caught between outrage and intrigue, found herself playing along just to see how far this lunatic would take the joke. Over the next few days, he didn't relent. He brought sketches, crude models, a half-working prototype that clunked and sparked but looked suspiciously like legs. He described ball bearings, torque, and hydraulic pistons with the same tone someone else might use to describe caresses. Every term sounded dirty when run through alien translators, and her people blushed so furiously during his presentations that she nearly demanded he continue out of spite. He called it calibration, they called it indecency. She called it maddening. Yet beneath the comedy of errors was something else. The human didn't see her as broken. He didn't lower his voice in pity or look away in discomfort. He talked about her as if she were a project worth finishing, a warrior worth returning to her feet, a woman worth walking beside. That part shook her more than the innuendo. 10 years of hovering at eye level with sitting courtiers had trained her to expect less, to settle. Suddenly, here was a man from a species too stubborn to take impossible as an answer. She tested him with biting humor, mocking his attachment methods, asking whether his bolts came in sizes adequate for royalty, implying that his prototypes looked limp. Instead of retreating, he volleyed back every jab, twisting words into clever comebacks. When she said his design looked stiff, he said stiffness was necessary in the right situations. When she accused him of arrogance, he replied that sometimes arrogance was just confidence dressed up for the party. The court was scandalized, the guards were in hysterics, and she was starting to wonder if he could actually pull it off. Each night she replayed the absurdity. 10 years of doctors telling her to accept fate, 10 years of relatives reminding her that dignity mattered more than ability, 10 years of wheels defining her boundaries. And then a human walks in, dirt under his nails and mischief in his grin, and casually announces he can give her legs. Maybe it was a line, maybe it was a miracle, maybe both, but she found herself clinging to the possibility. Even if it was nonsense, at least it was new nonsense. The whispers spread across the palace. Some swore she had already accepted his gift and was hiding in her chambers to test them. Others joked that her nights were full of calibration sessions. Everywhere she rolled, she caught smirks, heard muffled giggles, saw wide eyes pretending innocence. And yet, she didn't shut it down. For the first time in a decade, she was the center of a story that wasn't tragedy. Even if the punchline was bawdy, even if the setup was absurd, it was her story again. The human engineer, unfazed by scandal, finally wheeled in a case covered in grease stains and humming with suppressed energy. He tapped it like a magician about to reveal a trick and said, "Ready to stand." The words weren't whispered. They weren't solemn. They were delivered like a challenge, a dare, a promise, and a joke all at once. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt her heart lurch at the thought that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't bluffing at all. The case opened with a hiss, and for a moment the entire court leaned in as though expecting fireworks or perhaps a scandalous reveal. Inside lay a pair of legs, sleek metal, polished joints, wires running like veins, and a shine that made them look more like luxury jewelry than machinery. They weren't crude prosthetics. They were art, sculpted curves and strung lines, somewhere between military equipment and lingerie for the mechanically inclined. He tapped one, and it flexed at the knee with a smoothness that made even the most stoic guard mutter something about good range of motion. Someone coughed into their sleeve, pretending not to notice the implication. She stared at them with a mix of awe and suspicion. 10 years had taught her not to believe in miracles, but the craftsmanship was undeniable. Joints rotated without grinding, pistons slid with an almost sensual precision. If this was a pick-up attempt, he had gone to absurd lengths, literally building the metaphor. She smirked and asked if he'd measured properly, because she wouldn't tolerate legs that didn't fit. He shot back that he'd taken exact measurements while she wasn't looking, which earned gasps from the audience. He let the silence stretch before clarifying, he meant her chair's specs. By then, the laughter was already rolling, and he clearly enjoyed every second of the misunderstanding. The installation began, though half the court thought they were watching some forbidden performance. He knelt with tools that clinked and buzzed, guiding wires into connectors, bolting frames to the interfaces hidden in her chair's base. Every hiss of pressure release sounded indecent. Every tightening of screws made someone in the back snort. And when he muttered, "This one's a tight fit," she nearly choked, holding back her laugh. He wasn't just building her legs, he was conducting a comedy act disguised as engineering. Still, beneath the banter and innuendo, his hands moved with steady expertise. Each connection sealed cleanly, each joint aligned perfectly, as if he had rehearsed this moment 100 times. She noticed how his brow furrowed with focus, how he adjusted without hesitation, how every motion was confident. It was ridiculous to admit, but she felt more secure under his clumsy jokes than she had under a decade of solemn physicians who avoided eye contact. They treated her like glass. He treated her like a project. Maybe like a woman. Maybe both. The first time he powered them on, the legs twitched and jerked like a newborn beast. She flinched, bracing for disaster, but he steadied them with a hand on her knee. The contact was practical, necessary, and immediately misinterpreted by half the spectators, who nearly fainted at the sight of a human touching royal joints. She let them whisper, secretly savoring the scandal. For once, the attention wasn't about what she couldn't do, it was about what might happen next. He warned her it would take practice, calibration, adjustment to her balance. He explained torque curves and feedback sensors, but the words slid into her ears like innuendo-laced riddles. When he asked if she was ready to try them out, she quipped that it wasn't the first time someone had asked her that in a throne room. He grinned without missing a beat, countering that he guaranteed his version would make her stand. The guards doubled over trying to muffle their laughter. Then came the moment. She placed her hands on the chair's armrests, felt the weight of 10 years pressing against her shoulders, and tried. The legs responded with a shiver, a hiss, and then, miracle of miracles, lifted her upright. Her knees locked, her balance swayed, and she stood. Not hovered. Not rolled. Stood. The chamber erupted, some with cheers, others with shrieks of improper conduct, but she heard nothing over the roar in her chest. She was taller again. She was upright. She was herself, in a way she hadn't been for a decade. The legs were clumsy at first, moving with exaggerated enthusiasm, like a drunk dancer at a festival. Each step was too strong, each stride too ambitious. When she tried to walk forward, the legs veered sideways, nearly colliding with a guard who yelped and stumbled back. She muttered that they were too eager, and he replied that it was better than being limp. The scandalized gasps nearly drowned out the sound of servos adjusting. Somehow, humor softened the awkwardness of relearning motion. She tripped, stumbled, and nearly toppled twice, but instead of pity, the room filled with laughter. Every mistake became a joke, every wobble a punchline. She realized she wasn't embarrassed, she was exhilarated. If dignity had been her prison for 10 years, then comedy was the key. And the human engineer, with his relentless wordplay and shameless grins, had unlocked something bigger than legs. He'd given her permission to laugh at herself without shame. The first accidental dance mode activation sealed her new reputation. A misplaced tap triggered the internal program, and suddenly her legs swung into rhythmic gyrations, hips swaying, knees bending, ankles twirling with outrageous flair. The courtiers screamed as if scandal had broken loose in the flesh, guards dropped their spears laughing, and she couldn't stop herself. The legs wouldn't listen, and she found herself moving to a beat only the circuits knew. The engineer doubled over, gasping that he hadn't finished debugging that feature yet. She shot him a glare so sharp it could slice steel, but even she cracked into laughter when the legs dipped her into a dramatic bow she never intended. By the end of the trial run, she was exhausted, sweaty, and alive in a way she hadn't been since before the accident. The legs clicked and whirred, eager for more, while the court buzzed with stories that would spread like wildfire. Some would call it indecent, others miraculous. Some would swear it was love at first calibration. But she knew the truth. A ridiculous, shameless human had walked into her life, turned tragedy into comedy, and made her laugh so hard she forgot she was supposed to feel broken. And as she collapsed back into her chair, still grinning despite the chaos, he knelt beside her, tools in hand, eyes glinting with mischief. "Told you I'd get you standing," he murmured. She caught her breath, arched her brow, and whispered back, "Just wait until you see me running." The implication lingered in the air, sharper than any blade, funnier than any joke, hotter than any scandal. And judging by his smirk, he was more than ready for the next calibration. By the following day, rumors had spread faster than fire on dry kindling. What had begun as whispers about her miraculous new legs became bawdy jokes repeated by guards, nobles, even kitchen staff. Some swore she had been gifted new stamina. Others claimed she and the human engineer had locked joints in the throne room. A few of the more imaginative versions suggested the legs had been crafted for activities far outside the realm of walking. Instead of silencing the gossip, she found herself feeding it with wry smirks and raised brows. Why kill the fun when the scandal gave her more freedom than pity ever had? The engineer, on the other hand, seemed perfectly comfortable being at the center of such innuendo. When asked directly if he had, in fact, calibrated her for more than standing, he shrugged and said he always tested multiple functions. The way he said it made even the Queen nearly choke on her wine. He wasn't reckless, he was deliberate in how he turned every accusation into comedy, redirecting curiosity into laughter instead of suspicion. For a court that thrived on ceremony, he was chaos incarnate, and she loved watching him dismantle their stiffness with a smirk. Training sessions with the legs quickly became less about walking and more about performance. She had to learn balance, sure, but every misstep became a gag. When the joints locked unexpectedly, she declared herself frozen in admiration. When the motors hummed too loudly, she accused him of making them purr for attention. The guards who had once pitied her now competed to stand nearby just to hear what outrageous quip she'd toss next. Her throne room was no longer a hall of solemnity, it was a comedy stage with her as the unwilling but triumphant headliner. One afternoon, the engineer brought upgrades. Sleeker actuators, finer sensors, enhanced servos for quicker response. He laid them out on a velvet cloth like jewels. She teased that he'd come bearing dowry gifts, and he replied that she'd better not expect him to polish her ankles for free. The double meaning was so sharp it sliced the silence in two, and the roar of laughter shook the chamber. Even she had to cover her face to hide the grin threatening to take over. Somewhere deep down, she realized that humor had become the language of their bond. Every jest softened the intimacy building beneath it, daring the other to see just how far they'd push before something serious slipped through. The upgrades, of course, came with chaos. New agility meant more power, more responsiveness, and with it, more spectacular failures. She tried a simple sprint and ended up overshooting into a pillar, shaking dust from the ceiling. He winced but assured her the impact testing was intentional. The court was still laughing when she brushed herself off and demanded another run. She fell, stumbled, rolled, then rose again with a grin so wide it silenced anyone who thought to pity her. Failure no longer stung. Failure was hilarious, and hilarity made her unstoppable. But as much as humor carried them, there were moments that sliced through the comedy with startling sharpness. Standing on a balcony one evening, legs steady beneath her, she caught her reflection in the polished glass. For the first time in a decade, she didn't see a prisoner of her chair. She saw herself, taller, stronger, whole in ways she had forgotten. The laughter mattered, but so did this quiet, undeniable truth. The human hadn't just rebuilt her body, he had rebuilt her sense of self. When he joined her and teased about her checking herself out, she let him have his joke, but part of her wondered if he realized the weight of what he'd given her. Of course, solemnity never lasted long. That same night, the legs dance mode reactivated without warning, and she found herself gyrating under the stars while the engineers scrambled to shut it off. She swore he programmed it on purpose. He swore he hadn't. Neither could speak through their laughter long enough to argue properly. The memory of that balcony dance would haunt them both, not as humiliation but as the purest proof that comedy had become the heartbeat of her new life. Court politics, once oppressive, now bent to her advantage. Rivals who tried to mock her found themselves drowned out by the engineer's quick wit and her willingness to turn every insult into a punchline. Broken legs, broken pride, one sneered, only for her to reply, "At least mine come with upgrades." The chamber erupted, and her rival shrank in silence. It was a new form of power, humor as weapon, laughter as shield. And she wielded it with growing skill, her human accomplice always ready with the setup or the save. The closeness between them, wrapped in banter and mischief, began to shift in ways neither could ignore. Their jokes carried heat now, the kind of double meanings that made the guards cough into their hands and the courtiers fan themselves. When she said he was the only man who knew how to handle her legs, the chamber practically melted. He winked, unflinching, and promised he wasn't done exploring her functions. Everyone laughed, but beneath it, something charged lingered between them. Something dangerous, thrilling, real. What none of them expected was the request from her mother, the Queen. Summoned to the high chamber, the engineer found himself face to face with a ruler who had spent years watching her daughter suffer. Instead of anger or suspicion, she thanked him. Not in flowery words, but with a simple nod that carried the weight of an empire. "You gave her back her fire," she said, her voice steady. "Do not let it go out." It was the first time anyone had put the truth so plainly. And though he joked later about having royal approval, he carried her words like armor. By the end of that week, the court had stopped pitying the princess and started fearing her wit. She strutted with mechanical confidence, tossing out one-liners sharper than swords, her laugh echoing in halls once heavy with silence. They called her Hot Rod, they whispered Steel Queen, and every title only made her grin wider. But behind the humor, behind the scandal, there was a truth everyone felt but dared not say aloud. The human hadn't just given her legs, he had given her power. And power, wrapped in comedy and scandal, was far more dangerous than any throne. The legs were no longer just tools or symbols, they had become legend. By the time the 10th day arrived, bards in the lower districts were already composing songs about the princess who could kick down walls and hearts alike. Some of the verses weren't exactly flattering, but she secretly enjoyed every exaggerated line. It was better to be mocked for scandal than forgotten for weakness. Everywhere she walked, heads turned, not because she was in a chair but because the rhythm of her strides echoed through marble halls like the opening drums of war. She had been invisible once. Now she was unforgettable. The human engineer found himself drafted into this legend, though he didn't seem to mind. In fact, he leaned into the role of comic relief, shamelessly fanning the flames. When courtiers accused him of being too familiar with royalty, he bowed theatrically and declared himself her personal leg handler. When asked if he had any regrets, he quipped that he should have added cup holders to the knees. The guards nearly fell over at that one, and though the queen rolled her eyes, even she cracked the faintest smile. Humor had become armor for them both, and no amount of gossip could pierce it. Training gave way to daring demonstrations. She sprinted across courtyards, scaled stairs in record time, and even leapt onto the banquet table one evening just to prove she could. Plates clattered, goblets toppled, but she landed steady, grinning like a predator. The court gasped in horror. She looked at the human and asked if her legs were insured. Without missing a beat, he replied, "Only if you don't spread them too wide." The entire room collapsed into laughter, and the scandalous line would be repeated in taverns for months. The bond between them, once wrapped in quips and innuendo, sharpened into something undeniable. They lingered longer in each other's presence, jokes turning softer, banter carrying an edge of intimacy. One evening, when he adjusted a faulty sensor near her hip, the brush of his hand sent heat rushing to her face. She covered it with a joke about him poking around her circuits, but the look they exchanged afterwards said everything words couldn't. They had danced around the double meanings long enough. Her legs, however, still had a sense of humor of their own. During a diplomatic feast, an overcharged battery caused them to jolt mid-stride, sending her into an accidental twirl that spilled wine on a visiting ambassador. Mortified attendants rushed forward, but she just raised her glass and declared it a splash of royal hospitality. The hall erupted in cheers, and the ambassador, blushing to his ears, toasted back. She had turned what could have been an insult into a performance. The human whispered that she was learning faster than the legs themselves. She whispered back that she had the best teacher, though she refused to say whether she meant in mechanics or mischief. As the days passed, her power solidified. No longer seen as fragile, she became a force of nature. Rivals found their jabs useless, as every barb turned into another joke for her arsenal. The queen, ever watchful, admitted privately that she had underestimated both her daughter and the human. "I thought you'd chained yourself to scandal," she told her one night. "Instead, you've chained scandal to yourself." It was the closest thing to praise she'd ever heard from her mother, and it left her grinning long after. But the true test came not from courtiers or whispers, it came from herself. Standing at the edge of the training ground, legs humming with readiness, she turned to the human and asked the question she'd avoided for weeks. "Do you think I can really run?" He met her gaze without a joke this time. "I didn't build you to walk. I built you to move forward." It was the first time he'd spoken without a double meaning, and somehow that made her chest tighten more than any innuendo ever had. So she ran. Not a stumble, not a shuffle, but a full sprint across the field, arms pumping, hair streaming, laughter echoing behind her. The legs responded perfectly, every piston, every joint working in harmony. She ran until her lungs burned, until the palace walls blurred, until the echoes of her past life couldn't keep up. When she finally stopped, breathless and shaking, she turned to see him watching, pride in his eyes, tools forgotten at his side. She laughed through her gasps, shouted that she felt alive, and for once the laughter wasn't hiding anything. It was pure, unfiltered joy. The guards called her hot rod louder than ever, the courtiers whispered new rumors about what else those legs could do, and the queen sighed as if she'd accepted that chaos was now part of her kingdom. But beneath all the noise, beneath every joke and double meaning, there was one truth neither she nor the human could deny. 10 years in a chair had made her forget what it meant to stand. He had reminded her. 10 days with him had made her forget what it meant to feel alone. He had changed that too. Their banter never stopped, of course. Even as they stood side by side on the balcony again, she teasing about his sloppy wiring and him countering about her heavy steps, the double meanings never dried up. But now, each word carried something heavier under the laughter. When she told him he'd given her more than legs, he smirked and asked if she meant the stamina too. She rolled her eyes, shoved his shoulder, and whispered that maybe she'd let him find out. And that was the beauty of it. Not a fairy tale ending with vows or crowns, not a tragedy of broken bodies and broken hearts. Just a princess with robotic legs, a shameless human who refused to treat her like glass, and a kingdom that would never stop talking about the night dance mode took over the throne room. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, scandalous, hilarious, and real. And for her, after 10 years of silence, it was everything she wanted.